Hi, I'm Abid and I'm going to be your instructor for this container candle making class. Now, just as a quick background about myself, I've been doing candles with my wife Neha for the past 2 years now. Initially, the idea started off as a hobby, but then it evolved as a business. Now, we've spent 9 months of testing our candles before we actually decided to launch our product to the public. So you can rest assured that all the information that you will get from this course is given from a person who actively makes candles, actively tests candles, and also sells candles for a living. In this course, we will be going over common candle making terminology, the different types of waxes that you can use, the different types of wicks and how to select the most optimal one, fragrance oils and candle math. Yes, there's going to be math included as well. We'll also obviously go over how you can make a container candle from coconut and soy wax. And finally, we will be going over how you can troubleshoot every single problem that you might face in the future when making your candles. To make a container candle, you obviously need supplies. So here I have basically everything that you might need to make one of these. So what we're looking at is a pitcher. This is what we will be using to pour our wax inside the jars. You will need a candle jar. We will also need one thermometer so we can always test out the temperature of the wax throughout the whole process. You will need your fragrance oil, wick holders, wicks. You will also need double-side stickers so you can stick your wicks to the bottom of the jars. You will need a spatula so you can mix the fragrance oil and the wax together. You also need a digital scale so you can weigh your wax and your fragrance before you actually use them. And obviously, for the biggest part, you'll either need coconut wax, soy wax, or a blend of both. Now, this does seem like a lot, but you do need every single item that I mentioned before to be able to complete this course. This concludes that lesson, and the next lesson we will be going over common candle making terminology which is used among candle makers. It is very important that you understand them as we'll be using them across all the course. Anyways, I will see you in the next one. Just like anything that is scientific, there are terminologies that candle makers use, and these include the following. FO is fragrance oil, FL or fragrance load. This is the amount of fragrance that we will use inside our wax, and it is usually referred to in percentage. Cold throw, and this is how strong a candle smells when you pick it up and smell it before burning it. Then you have the hot throw, and this is how strong a candle smells while it is burning. Melt pool, this is when the wax on the surface of your candle melts from one edge to another, and this is very important to remember for the future. Curing, this is the time needed for the candle to rest after being made and before being lit. Flash point, this is the maximum temperature a fragrance oil can handle before being evaporated. Anyways, I will see you in the next one. When it comes to candle making, there are three major components that we should know about. And this is your wax, your wicks, and your fragrance oil. Now, in this chapter, we will be going over the wax, but later in the course, we will be going in deep detail about wicks and fragrance oils. So when it comes to the wax, you have so many different types. You have rapeseed wax, soy wax, palm wax, beeswax, coconut wax, and so on and so forth. They are all used in the industry, but in this course, we will only be talking about soy and coconut wax. It is very important to understand the composition of the wax you are working with, because every single one has its own application. For example, some of them are soft and they can be used inside container candles like this one, and others are more hard, which can be used for pillar candles or votive candles. Now, not all waxes come the same. Some of them will come in blocks, others will come in flakes, and some of them will come in like small discs. Now, there isn't a big difference between those, and what makes a difference in a wax is the molecular structure and the blend that is inside the wax. You see, when someone says 100% soy wax, this doesn't mean it is 100% soy wax. There could be vegetable-based additives like soy-based additives that are added inside the wax to help improve its performance or fragrance retention. And you shouldn't really care about what the wax looks like, whether it is a block, a flake, or a disc. So the secret to every good candle is the proper usage of wax. Some of them are soft, some of them are hard, some of them have a high melting point, some of them have a low melting point, and some of them just accept more fragrance oils than others. So in the next two sections, we will be talking in deep detail about soy wax and coconut wax, how to blend both, and whether you should actually be blending waxes or not. The first wax that we're going to talk about is going to be soy wax. Now, soy wax is derived from soybeans, and this makes it a sustainable type of wax. It is 100% vegetable-based, and it is the most commonly used wax among candle makers. Now, the reason behind this is because it is fairly affordable, there is a wide variety of it, it is widely available in the market, and it is very easy to use. The issue with soy wax, though, is that it has so many natural imperfections like frosting, crystallization, and wet spots. Now, if you're not sure what these are, I would recommend again to go back to the terminology section of this course and check all the terms that are mentioned there. Anyways, even if you use soy wax and you run into those problems, most of them are just aesthetic issues and they do not affect the performance of your candle. But some people don't like them, and for this reason, we have a section later in the course where we will be talking about how we can solve every single problem that you can face. When using soy wax, you will also have a hard time getting a strong scent through, and this is because of the high melting point that the wax has. And this is why I recommend using a coconut and soy wax blend. You see, coconut has a lower melting point and it tends to allow fragrance to evaporate within the candle faster. And soy wax has a higher melting point. So there is a good balance of both, which allows for longer burn time and more fragrance retention. We will be talking more about this later. Anyways, in the next section, we will be talking about coconut wax. Coconut wax is another type of sustainable wax. The only difference is this one is not available in the market as soy wax. The way it's made involves processing coconut oil and turning it into the wax that we use in our candles. Now, the advantage of using coconut wax is its ability to have a very strong scent through. Now, this is due to its low melting point and its softer structure, which allows the fragrance oils to seep outside the wax in a much easier way. This doesn't come without consequences though. You see, because of the low melting point of coconut wax, this allows the candles to have much less burning time compared to soy wax. When we were doing our tests, we found out that coconut wax has on average 8 to 10 hours less burn time when you are using 100% soy wax in your candles. And this test was made in an 8-ounce jar. Coconut wax can only be used in container candles due to how soft it is. It cannot be used in pillars or votives unless it was mixed with other types of waxes like soy wax or beeswax, or if it was added with some additives like stearic acid, which basically hardens the wax. Now you know about both coconut and soy wax and the difference between both. Now in the next lesson, what we will talk about is whether we should actually blend both waxes or if we should get pre-blended waxes that already have a specific percentage of coconut and soy wax already sold as a package. Wax blending is actually possible, and this is usually done by advanced candle makers to get specific results, whether you want a longer candle burn or if you want a stronger scent through. But nowadays, there are so many waxes in the market that already have a good blend of both soy and coconut. Now, if you are new to all this, I would recommend buying a pre-blended wax like the Superior M12, which is a blend of both soy and coconut, and this makes it a vegan and non-toxic type of wax. If you want to buy them separately though, I would recommend going with Eco Soya CB Advanced for your soy wax and Eco Coco Container Blend for your coconut wax. Now, when it comes to the ratio, I would start off with 50% soy, 50% coconut, and play with those ratios based on what you might need. I would add more soy if I want a longer burn time, and I would add more coconut if I want a stronger scent throw and a softer top. For this course though, we will be using the Superior M12 and we will not be making any blend on our own. So if you don't have this type of wax, I want you to check the following things from your supplier before we can move forward to making our candle. You will want to check what's the maximum fragrance load the wax can handle, and this is usually between 6 and 12%, but this varies from one wax to another. I want you to check the heating range of the wax and the pouring range of the wax. Now, when it comes to the part of actually making the candle and you manage to get any of these numbers wrong, you will have so many different deformities in your candle that you have to troubleshoot. But don't worry about that, as I will be reminding you constantly to always check the temperatures and the different measurements that you have to abide by for the specific wax that you're using. Anyways, this wraps up chapter 2 about waxes. In the next chapter, we will talk about wicks. It is safe to say that the wick is the soul of the candle. Now, what the wick does is it melts the wax and pulls this melted wax form upwards to sustain the flame of the wick. Now, it is this heat that allows the wax to vaporize, and this evaporation is what allows the scent to actually flow into your space. But it is not just, okay, let's pick a wick and call it a day. This is not how it works. If you pick the wrong wick size for your candle, you can end up with so many problems. For example, a large wick can be very hot to a point where the fragrance doesn't even have the chance to evaporate outside the candle jar itself. However, if your candle wick is very small, then you will end up with something like a tunnel, which is basically a small hole inside your candle with so much leftover wax around the jar. Now, we don't want that, do we? So this is why it is very important in the initial process to actually start testing for different wick sizes, which is optimal for your candle. Now, what affects this decision is 4 things: the diameter of your jar from the top, the type of wax you're using, the amount of fragrance you're using or fragrance load, and which type of fragrance you're using. All these 4 things work together to decide which wick you need for your jar. So before you start selling your candles, you might have to do a lot of tests to get the perfect wick, and this is what we will be talking about in the next few lessons. When talking about wicks, there are 2 main types that you have to concern yourself about. And this is wood wicks that look like this. And then you have the cotton wicks that look something like this. This is something traditional that most of us know. Now, in this course, we will only be talking about cotton wicks because this is what we will be using. Now, there are other things like hemp wicks, zinc core wicks, and even lead wicks, but we're not gonna bother ourselves about this. Just know that they exist. Cotton wicks are categorized into 2 things, and this is the series and the size. You have examples like CD16, LX8, Echo 12, and so on. First, you have the series, followed up by the size. Now, the series is basically the composition of the wick. At the end of the day, it is a cotton wick, but the way it's made and the way it's fabricated or the way it's threaded is different from one series to another. Now, an Echo 6, for example, doesn't have to be the same like a CD6. An Echo 8 could be equal to a CD12 or a CD14. And this all boils down to the testing that you do. Once you do more tests, you will be able to tell the difference from one wick to another. Now, once you've done almost 100 to 200 candles, let's say, you will be able to easily identify which wick you might need for the candle. Now, it will not be as easy, but it will be easier than when you did it the first time. So all this depends, of course, like we said, on the wax that you're using, the fragrance load, the fragrance type, and also the dyes and any additives that you included in your candle. Just remember that anything extra you add to your candle or change in your candle could affect the wick size that you're using. Let's consider this scenario. You have a perfect candle that uses a 3-inch jar and a CD14 wick with, let's say, soy wax. Now this candle happens to be jasmine and it has a perfect melt pool. Everything is going very well. Now there comes a day you want to introduce a new scent. Let's say you go with sandalwood. Sandalwood is heavier molecular structure than jasmine. So the wick will actually have a harder time to pull the molten wax up and sustain the flame. This is why in some cases you might have to go one wick up or one wick down depending on your overall formula of the candle. Some other thing that you can know about wicks is that some of them come pre-waxed and some of them are just plain cotton. You see, you remember when we said the liquid form wax would be pulled up by the wick to be able to sustain the flame? This additional wax that is added to the wicks is basically something that will help in sustaining that flame. It will also help in improving the burn performance of your candle. Now some wicks come already pre-waxed and others don't. Now the ones that do, usually they come waxed with vegetable type of wax, like the Eco series for example, and others don't because some candle makers actually, they prefer to wax their own wicks. I don't do that though. I just get pre-tabbed, which is this like small steel thing, and pre-waxed wicks that are ready to use. The melting point is when the wax turns from a solid state to a liquid state. And this transition is extremely important to keep note of because it will influence your candle's outcome. And this includes the appearance of your candle, the durability of it, how much it will burn for, and all these things boil down to the wick that you have selected. Waxes with lower melting points like coconut, they tend to burn faster, but they are usually easier to deal with. These waxes also tend to have more appealing and more aesthetically pleasing candles with a nice soft and creamy tops. On the other hand, waxes that have higher temperatures are a bit harder to deal with. They usually have issues like frosting, crystallizations, and this is something like soy wax. But these things have their applications even outside the container candle making, if you want, topic. And we're talking about things like pillar candles where you need the candle to actually maintain structure. And this high melting point of your candle is what allows it to get a robust and strong structure. The choice of wick is directly impacted by the melting point of your wax. A wax with a lower melting point would logically need a smaller wick than a wax with a higher melting point. This ensures an even burn and prevents the wick from burning very highly, which in return will allow the wax to melt much faster. And the same logic applies to harder waxes. Additionally, the melting point of your wax directly impacts the dispersion of your fragrance from the candle. As we mentioned before, waxes with lower melt point have a stronger scent throw than waxes with a higher melt point. And this is why we actually use coconut wax, which has a low melt point, with soy wax, which has a higher melt point, to get a good balance of both robustness and scent throw. So this is why it's very important to understand your wax's melting point before making a decision on which wick you need to actually pick. Again, a wax with a higher melting point will require a stronger flame and in return a bigger wick. A wax with a lower melting point is the other way around though. But now it begs the question, which wick do we need to use for our candles and how do we actually make a decision where to start? Well, in the next lesson, we'll be talking just about that. I should start this lesson by saying that to get the right wick size, this will involve a lot of testing. And to find the perfect wick size, unfortunately, but I have to say this, you have to do a lot of testing. Now, initially, it might be a bit hard, but it will get much easier later down the line. But how do you test for wick size though? Alright, so first thing we have to do is grab a jar and grab a measuring tape. And what you need to do is measure the diameter of your jar from the top, from one corner to another. Anything that is bigger than 4 inches will most likely require 3 wicks. Anything that is between 4 and 3 inches will require 2 wicks that are at least 1 inch apart. And anything that is less than 3 inches will only need 1 wick. Alright, so you picked the wick, you made the candle, but now how do we actually test if the wick is proper for our application or not? For this, you have to keep an eye on a couple of things. If the candle tunneled, then you need to go 1 to 2 sizes up depending on the size of the tunnel. If your candle burns too fast or gets too hot to hold even though it's your first or second burn, then you need to wick down 1 or 2 sizes. If your wick is turning off on its own, then it is clogged and it doesn't have enough heat to melt the wax fast enough for it to go up and sustain that flame. For this, reconsider any additives you have added or wick up 1 or 2 sizes. Don't forget to always trim your wick to 1/4 inch once you are making those tests, because a long wick can burn your candle much faster, resulting in inconsistent results, and it can also generate soot because the wick is high, which means the flame is high, and then the drafts can hit that wick, and in return, soot will automatically come out of it. Now, this does seem like a lot. I understand. I was there. I was frustrated initially, but I can tell you it gets easier. The more tests you do and the more candles you make, selecting a wick after getting a new wax or new fragrance will become second nature. Maybe you will have to wick 1 size up or 1 size down, but that's as far as it goes. Initially, you might have to do much more tests. Anyways, this wraps up the chapter on wicks. The next chapter, we will be talking about fragrance oils. Fragrance oils are concentrated synthetic blends of aromatic compounds made to give out a specific scent. They offer a variety of options and they usually replicate natural scents that we know, or they tend to create new ones that actually don't exist in nature. Some fragrance oils are made by combining natural essential oils with some synthetic compounds, and others are actually just made with 100% synthetic compounds. Now, this doesn't make them harmful, but the only thing we need to look at is to make sure that our fragrance oils are free of toxins. And this means parabens or phthalates. This allows you as a candle maker or a candle brand to actually label your candles as free of toxins. Of course, given that you are using a specific type of vegetable-based wax. There is a natural alternative to fragrance oils, and this is essential oils. But the thing is about essential oils is that they are hard to find in the market. Using them in candles requires advanced candle making techniques to get a strong throw, and there are not so many options when it comes to scents because essential oils are made from natural resources, and in general it is harder to work with in candles. Now, if a wellness brand is what you're aiming for, then the essential oils are the route that you want to go with. But if you want to create beautifully scented candles and have a variety of options, then synthetic fragrance oils are good enough for you. They are harmless in most of the cases. Fragrance oils are more affordable than essential oils, and they also have a stronger, more concentrated, and more consistent scent through. Just make sure when you're buying your oils that they're not labeled as perfume oils, and they are in fact candle-grade fragrance oils. When it comes to candle making, it is very important to understand the science behind how the wax and the fragrance oils work together. You see, when working with candles, it is extremely important to keep an eye on temperatures and to get them right, especially when you are dealing with pouring your fragrance oil inside the hot wax. Getting those measurements wrong could lead to so many different problems later down the line after you have already made your candle and even after it has dried. It is almost always the case that you will have to pour your fragrance oils inside your hot wax anywhere between 165 and 185 degrees Fahrenheit. This is because if your wax isn't hot enough, the fragrance oils will have a hard time to actually blend with it. Just one thing to make sure of is that the flash point of your fragrance oil is more than the heat of the wax when you're actually pouring the fragrance inside the wax. And if you don't remember what flash point is, like we discussed in the terminology section, flash point is the maximum temperature in which the fragrance can handle before it starts to burn. Anyway, after pouring your fragrance inside the hot wax and stirring for 2 minutes for the fragrance molecules to evenly spread within the wax, and then the wax solidifies, those fragrance molecules are trapped inside the wax. So it is more like water and oil and not like water and sugar. It is the same concept. Now, once your candle is curing and the wax starts solidifying, there are two things that can happen with the fragrance. Either it sits properly inside the wax, or it starts seeping out and forming like little drops of oil on the top of your candle. Now, this is a phenomenon we call sweating, and if you didn't check that terminology, then sweating is basically when your fragrance oil starts seeping outside the wax and form little droplets on top of it. Now, if this problem happens to you, it's not a big deal and it can be fixed, and this is what we will be talking about later in the course. So now it's finally time to burn your candle after waiting for the curing phase to finish, which is between 14 to 21 days. And you take that lighter, you light up your candle, and you start smelling that beautiful aroma. Now, how does this aroma actually come out of your candle? You see, we said that the fragrance molecules are trapped inside the wax. So once you have a full melt pool, this melted wax will allow the fragrance oil molecules to evaporate outside the wax and provide the scent that you are actually smelling within your space. Fragrance oils are usually added to the wax in a specific percentage. Now, there is two ways in which this can be done. The first way is percentage by weight, and the second way is percentage by volume. Now, percentage by weight is more accurate because it does account for the differences in densities from one fragrance oil to another. To use this method, simply weigh in your wax, and then what you need to do, based on the percentage of fragrance oil that you need to add, you have to multiply that number by that percentage. So what I have here is 200 grams of wax. Now, what needs to be done is basically measure the same amount of fragrance oil by weight depending on the percentage that we need. So I'm going to move this aside and I'm going to take my handy calculator. So in this recipe, I'm going to be using 8% of fragrance oil. So what I have to do is multiply the 200 grams of wax that I have by 0.08 or 8%. And this number will be 16 grams. And this is how much fragrance oil we need to add to our wax once it has reached the proper temperature. So I have my handy dandy little silicone pitcher here. I'm going to place it on this one. And of course, we have to remember to reset the weight of the silicone mold. And slowly I will start measuring in 16 grams of fragrance oil. Alright, so this is exactly 16 grams. And what we will be doing with this one later is, again, once this goes to the proper temperature, we will be putting it inside our wax and mixing for 2 minutes for these two to be able to blend together. Percentage by volume is another method that you can go with, but I personally don't use it because this doesn't account for the different densities that exist in different fragrance oils. And this could cause some inconsistencies in different scents that you have in your candles. And this is really not an optimal thing that you want to have. So when the time comes and we actually start making our candles, which by the way, I promise you is in just one more chapter, we will be measuring our fragrance oil by weight. Anyway, this concludes this chapter on fragrance oils. In the next chapter, it will be the final one where we talk about theory before we make our candles. And we will be talking a little bit about candle additives that can go inside your wax. In this chapter, we will be talking about the different additives that can go inside your wax and ultimately inside your candle. Now, those additives will serve the purpose of improving your candle's performance. What do I mean by performance? Well, these are things like color retention, fragrance retention, increased burn time, and overall improved aesthetics of your candle. One thing to note is that in most of the cases, you will not really need to use any additives, and also adding a lot of additives into your wax can ultimately clog your wick and ruin your candle. So this is a quick introduction about additives. In the next lesson, we will be talking about the different types that you can use and the purpose for every single one. The first item on our list would be stearic acid. Now, this is the most commonly used additive, and it can actually already be available in your wax. Stearic acid is used to harden the wax and in return increase its burn time. It is also referred to as an opacifier, and this is because it will help brighten up the colors of your candle and create a more creamy surface. UV inhibitor is another additive which basically helps in maintaining the color of your candle, and this is done by protecting it from the UV lights. This is useful for candle makers who put dyes inside their candle. Whether it was chips or liquids, they are both the same. And if you actually go to so many farmers markets or just regular markets where there's a lot of sun exposure, UV inhibitor is something that you want to consider. Just remember that it doesn't maintain the color of your candle for a lifetime. Obviously, a lot of sun exposure will gradually change the color, but it will still help give it a longer time before the actual color starts fading away. Speaking of colors, let's talk about dyes. So as I mentioned, dyes are obviously what you add in a candle to change the color, but they come in two forms, chips or liquid. Now, these forms don't matter, but it's rather the quality of dye that you get which matters a lot. You see, some dyes, for example, let's say you get a blue dye, and then what you would expect is a blue color, but you would end up with something like gray, for example. So dyes, if you want to work with them, you have to make sure that you're getting the proper quality, otherwise you will end up with inconsistent results that you were not expecting. Also, make sure you are adding the right amount and don't go overboard, because a lot of dye can also clog your wick and prevent it from burning enough so that it will create a full melt pool. Another form of additives is not directly added inside the wax, but rather on the candle. Dried flowers is something that so many candle makers use, but I prefer not to because I just want to keep myself away from any hazard that could potentially come back to me. So why do I avoid them though? You see, sometimes dried flowers can release drops of water, and when this drop of water gets in touch with the flame, it creates little explosions which can in return become a huge hazard and have a much bigger fire. Let alone the water, the dried flowers themselves can catch on fire. But anyways, this is a controversial topic and it's up to you. If you want to use dried flowers or any cosmetics on your candles, just try to keep them as far away from the center of the wick as possible. When adding something extra to your wax, always check your supplier's recommendations and don't go overboard. Anyways, this wraps up this short chapter on additives. Finally, in the next one, we will be making our first candle. So after all this theory, now it's finally time to make our candle. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our handy dandy scale. We're gonna take our jar and place it on the scale. Definitely, you always have to reset your scale back to 0 once you put any weight on it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure the full jar with water. And then once we do that, we're gonna multiply this number by 0.8 to get the amount of wax that we need for the jar. And this is because wax and water have different densities. So it says I will need 250 grams of water, and let's multiply this number by 0.8 to see how much we will end up needing for wax. So 250 by 0.8 is 200 grams of wax. So before we do that, if you have only one jar, and by the way, this is just a thing that you'll do on your first time. After that, you will automatically know how much wax you need for your jar. Anyways, if you're using the same jar, I would recommend removing the water and drying it clean until there's not even one drop of water. So I'm gonna avoid that, and what I'm gonna do is a nice trick and use another jar. So now I'm gonna put my pitcher on the scale, not forgetting to reset it back to 0. And I'm gonna measure 200 grams of wax inside my pitcher. So while you're using your wax, don't worry about getting your hands dirty. This is something normal that you will encounter as a candle maker. You will always have wax wherever you go and whatever you do. So now we measured 200 grams of wax, and the next step is to start melting this. But before we do, I'm gonna use my thermometer and place it inside my pitcher just so I can monitor the temperature every step of the way. So I'm gonna take my pitcher, I'm gonna put it in the boiling water and let it sit. So while this is boiling, let me tell you about this setup right here. So this setup is basically a double boiler. And it is very important if you don't already have a proper boiler for your wax. Now, why is it the case? If you put your pitcher directly on the heat, the high temperatures could burn the wax very fast and it could end up in inconsistent results. So hence why we use a double boiler. Now, again, while this is happening, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start measuring our fragrance oils. So I'm gonna grab this handy silicone mold that I will use to measure my fragrance oil, and make sure it's silicone, or cardboard is fine, but it's not recommended. The best option to use is silicone. You should avoid cardboard and paper because the fragrance oils can seep outside the paper and you don't want that. So I'm gonna take my mold, I'm gonna put it on the scale, and I'm gonna always remember to reset the measurement. We're gonna use this pipette to soak up our fragrance oils, but in my case, I have this nice little design, if you want, where I can directly put in my oils. So before we do that, what we're gonna do is measure 7% of fragrance oil to the 200 grams of wax that we're using. Again, this 7% is just a number because we're using the Superior M12, and if you're using a different wax, your numbers might vary a bit. Always check your supplier's recommendations. So I'm gonna take my calculator and I'm gonna multiply 200 grams by 7%. This gives us 14 grams of fragrance oil that we have to use inside our wax. So I'm gonna measure that. So this is 14 grams of fragrance oil. While my wax is still reaching up to the 75 degrees Celsius that I wanted to, we're just gonna wait a little bit and wick our jar in the meantime. So I'm gonna take my double sticker and I'm gonna put it on the bottom of my wick like so. And then if you don't have any wick centering tool other than this one, or like any wood piece that you can use to center your wicks, or even clips, we're gonna just try our best to put it in the middle of the jar. So if you don't get it perfectly centered, don't worry about it too much initially. With practice, you will get better. So I'm gonna set up my wick while my wax is still heating up to 75. And then I'm gonna let it sit on the side for now. I'm gonna remove my scale, and I'm actually, while the wax is still getting hot, I'm going to use the centering tool to center my wick. Okay, there we go. So now my wick is in place, it's fully centered, and I think I'm ready to pour the fragrance oil inside the wax after I remove it from the heat. Of course, always one handy trick is to keep a towel with you or a paper towel, both are fine, and dry up the bottom of your pitcher. It is also a good thing to note that don't put your pitcher on cold surfaces because it could get the wax very cold in a much faster pace. So now I'm gonna pour my fragrance oils and remove the thermometer for a bit. So all my oils are now inside the wax. I'm gonna grab my spatula and I'm gonna set up a timer for 2 minutes. So for the entire 2 minutes, we're gonna be stirring gently to avoid any air bubbles once we pour the wax. So for 2 minutes straight, we're just gonna be stirring gently. So it's just coming up till 2 minutes, and now I'm gonna stop the timer and I'm gonna stop mixing as well. Just before we pour, what I have to check is that the temperature is exactly 60 degrees before I put the wax inside my jar. So I'm going to do just that. If your wax is a bit hotter, then let it sit for some time up until it reaches 60 degrees, of course, for the superior M12. Again, if you're using a different wax, always follow your supplier's recommendations. Okay, now it reached 60 degrees, and what I'm gonna do is gently pour in my wax inside the jar to avoid air bubbles. So we're gonna do that. Don't stress it, just pour in one smooth, gentle pour. So that's all the wax poured inside the jar. Now all that's left to do is not to touch it. Let it sit for some time until it solidifies. Make sure it doesn't hit any direct sunlight. Don't touch the jar for up to 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, and then store it in a dry, dark area where there's no temperature changes so the candle can cure. And speaking of curing, this is actually the next lesson that we're going to talk about while we let our candle set. If you're in a country where the weather is very cold, my recommendation is before you actually put the wax inside the jar is to heat the jar. You can use a heat gun like this one to heat to just heat the sides of your jar, or you can even put your jar in the oven. And this is to, especially if you're using soy wax, and this is to prevent any wet spots happening on the side of your jar. And if you didn't check the terminology section, wet spots is basically when the soy wax starts solidifying and it contracts. And this is why the wax will start pulling in from the jar and it will show like these small wet spots all over. But this is not basically a problem that affects the performance of your candle, and it's just aesthetic. So this is one thing that you can do if you are living in an area that has inconsistent or cold temperatures. When you finish making your candle and while you are waiting for it to dry, two things happen during that time. The wax starts hardening and the fragrance oil molecules start blending with said wax. Now, while it may look like the wax is no longer liquid, don't think that this has completely hardened, because this is not really the case. The wax will continue to harden as the days goes by, and this is especially the case with vegetable-based waxes or even beeswax. And this is due to crystal formations becoming harder as the days goes by. Now, when it comes to fragrance, as we mentioned before, don't think that the wax and the fragrance oils will join together. This is not the case. So as the wax hardens, the fragrance molecules become trapped inside the wax. And because of this phenomena, if you didn't put your fragrance oils at the right temperature in the wax, then this little fragrance oil drops can escape the wax from the top and collect on the top of your candle. And this is what we already talked about and what we call sweating. Candle curing will help you benefit in two things: scent throw and burn time. How long you should cure a particular candle depends on the wax that you are using. For example, if you are using soy wax, then you need anywhere between 7 and 14 days. If you're using coconut wax, on the other hand, you need anywhere between 14 to even 21 days. Now, you can still get a scent throw and still use your candle after it had completely dried up, but it is recommended that you actually go through the curing process. Candle testing is extremely important. Let's say your wick was very high and it was very hot. It caused the glass or the jar to shatter. Now, let's say your fragrance oil load is too much and enough fragrance was seeping outside the wax that it became a hazard. Now, this is not something that you need. See, candles are dangerous and they're hazardous products. So it's good to test your candles to make sure that they are in good condition and that there's no problems whatsoever before you start shipping them out to customers. For this reason, we have to do tests. And the tests that we need to do are as follows. We need to test for scent throw, both cold and hot. We need to test for burn time in 3 to 4 hour intervals. And of course, don't forget to trim your wick to 1/4 inch before testing again. Also, leave enough time for the wax to harden before burn testing again. We need to also test for soot, flame height, mushrooming, tunneling, sweating, and any excessive frosting. And the downloadable resources, you will find a PDF where you can print and you can keep track of every single step in your testing phase. Remember, it is always important to test your candle after getting any new ingredient. For example, if you got a new wax, test. If you got a new fragrance, test. If you got a new jar, test. It's better to test and wait a few more months than to send a candle and have a disappointed customer. You want to avoid this hassle. When making candles, you also have to account for the changing temperatures of the seasons. Now, if you live in a country where there is only one season, then you are one of the lucky ones. But if not, then there are a few things that you have to consider. If you stay in the cold weather, then you have to make sure to heat up your jars, especially if you are using vegetable-based waxes. Failure to do so will make your wax freeze up much faster on the sides and cause issues like wet spots or even frosting. You can use a heat gun to do that, or you can pop your jars in the oven for a few minutes and then take them out. Your pouring temperature has to also be increased by a couple of degrees, and this is to prevent the wax from cooling too fast and causing crystallization issues. You should also make sure your candles are in controlled environment with no ups and downs in the temperature. Anywhere between 22 to 24 degrees is good. Now, if you are in a hot weather, you should decrease the pouring temperature of your wax by a few degrees. You can keep the candles in a stable, moderately cool temperature. What I found to be perfect is anywhere between, again, 22 to 24 degrees Celsius. Don't forget to always keep your candles away from direct sunlight, and keep the air conditioner on if you can, and set it to a fixed temperature. Just make sure that there is no excess moisture coming outside of it. So these are a few things that you can do if you have unstable weather conditions. This finalizes this chapter, and in the next one, we will be talking about any issues that you can come across when making candles and their solutions. Coming across issues when making candles is very normal, especially if it's your first few candles or if you're testing a new type of wax. Now, fortunately, I myself have come across countless issues, and I actually was able to troubleshoot most of them. So for this reason, what I did is I prepared a list of all the common mistakes that you can come across and a solution in which you can use to fix them. So this is what we will be going over in the next few sections of this course. Every single candle making problem that you can face and its solution. Candle sweating is when little drops of oil start seeping out outside your wax and collecting on top of your candle. Now, this could happen for a variety of reasons. It could be A, putting the fragrance in your wax at the wrong temperature. B, not stirring your fragrance long enough. C, too much fragrance load added to your wax. Or D, inconsistent room temperatures. The solutions are pretty straightforward, but what you have to do is check your previous formula and see if it matches any of these four things that I mentioned before. If the problem was A, then you might want to pour your fragrance oil into the wax at a bit hotter temperature, but still under the fragrance oil's flash point. Usually what I would do is start with going up 5 to 10 degrees and testing. If this worked, great. Otherwise, I would keep going up all the way until I reach 185 degrees Fahrenheit and stop there. If the issue persists, then this could be something else. If the problem was B, then you have to slowly and gently stir the wax for 2 minutes straight after you put in your fragrance oil. If the problem was C, then you have to decrease your fragrance load, try going 1% under in increments and test this out. If the problem was D, then you have to keep your candles in a cool, dark room as they cure. Also make sure your candles are not in direct contact with the sunlight and are in a room with a stable temperature. Now, before you start worrying too much about sweating, what you can do is grab a paper towel and start gently dabbing this paper towel on the oils until they are removed, and then let the candle sit. Usually it this problem will automatically get fixed after some time. What is a candle without any scent? Well, if you're having this problem, especially during the hot throw, then you might want to check for a few things. A, make sure you have enough fragrance oil for the wax that you are using. B, you're not giving enough time for your candle to cure. C, make sure you don't pour your fragrance in the wax at a temperature higher than the flash point. D, make sure you have high quality fragrance oils made for candles. E, you didn't wait long enough to get a full melt pool when burn testing your candle. F, you poured your fragrance oils at a very low temperature. If the problem was A, you have to check your wax label and find out the maximum fragrance load that it can handle. If you added anything under the recommended minimum, then try increasing your fragrance load to match at least that. If the problem is B, you have to let your wax cure for 21 days if it's cocoa soy and 14 days if it's pure soy. Now, this is a controversial topic, but I personally believe in it because I've tested it a lot. If the problem is C, check the flash point for your oil and pour your fragrance into the wax under that temperature. If the problem is D, then you have to get better fragrance oils, unfortunately. If the problem was E, then you didn't give your candle long enough time to get a full melt pool, or you are underwicked. And finally, if the problem was F, try putting your fragrance oils at higher temperatures as long as they are under the flash point. One thing worth noting is that pure soy wax is a bit picky when it comes to the different fragrance oils that it can work with, and it's a bit harder to get a strong hot throw with. And this is why in chapter 2, I recommended a blend of cocoa and soy wax, because as we mentioned, coconut wax has a lower melting point, which allows the fragrance to seep out faster from the candle and into your space. A sinkhole is something that looks like this. It happens when you pour your wax too cold and the top part freezes before the bottom. This allows the top of the wax to suck into itself and create a sinkhole. To fix this, try pouring your wax at a higher temperature and leave it in a room temperature area until it completely solidifies. If you already have a sinkhole, what you can do is use a heat gun to fill in the gaps or pour in additional wax to close that sinkhole. Air bubbles, on the other hand, are caused by two reasons. A, you were too aggressive while stirring the fragrance, or B, you poured the wax into your jar too fast. The next time you're making your candle, just keep note of those things. It can be easy to come across a sinkhole and air bubbles, but doing those small tricks like slowly pouring and pouring at high temperatures is what could save you a lot of headache. Anyways, if you are facing a problem of air bubbles, one thing you can do is poke holes around your wick and then use a heat gun to fill in the gaps and let those air bubbles escape. Frosting is a natural problem that happens with soy wax and vegetable-based waxes. Now the good thing is that frosting doesn't affect your performance of your candle, whether it was burn time or scent throw. It is this white layer that forms on top of a candle or on the side of it. Now, if you want to solve this problem, what you can do is store your candle at a room temperature area and make sure that there is no ups and downs in the temperature. Another thing you can do, and this is my personal recommendation again, is use cocoa soy wax. Any type of cocoa soy that I have personally used doesn't have any frosting problems. If you're using 100% soy wax, then you will surely come across frosting. And again, this is not a problem, but the only thing is explaining it to the person who is actually going to use the candle. Tunneling is where your candle has a small hole in the center, and then there's a lot of extra wax on the side of the jar. Now, there are 4 reasons that could cause this problem. It could be A, your wick size is too small. B, your wick is clogged due to additives like dye or even excess fragrance oils. C, the wick was cut too short. Or D, the candle wasn't lit long enough on the first burn. If the problem was A, then you have to wick up. Depending on the size of the tunnel, you have to assess whether you need to go 1 wick size higher or more. If the problem was B, try adding less dye and stay within the recommended fragrance load that the wax manufacturer recommends. If the problem was C, you should only trim your wick to 1/4 inch. Anything less than that will result in a small flame and in return, probably a tunnel, or even the wick turning off on its own. If the problem was D, you have to burn your candle to achieve a full melt pool. If this wasn't achieved within anywhere between 2 to 4 hours, then you are probably underwicked. A wet spot is when the wax pulls away from the jar. And this is caused when the space around the candle is cold or the jar itself is cold. You see, when wax becomes colder, when it starts setting in, it will contract and in return pull away from the jar. To avoid this problem, you can heat up your jars with a heat gun before you actually start pouring, or you can place them inside the oven for like 5 minutes until they are at the proper temperature, and then you can pour the wax inside of them. Just make sure that the jars are not burning hot and you can at least carry them. If you end up with wet spots after the candle has set and it has cured, then you can use a heat gun to potentially fix the problem. This will not 100% fix it, but it is something that can improve the aesthetic of your candle. Now, don't worry, because this is another common problem that can happen and it does not affect your candle performance whatsoever. Now is a great time to give yourself a tap on the back or even a mini celebration, because this container candle making course is almost done. Soon you will be on your way to making your own candles and you will not even need my help. Anyways, this wraps up this chapter. I will see you in the next and final one. As you make more candles, you will learn some tips and tricks that can help you along the way in your candle making process. Here are a few things that I was able to learn in the past few years. Number 1, wick testing. If you are testing a wick size and you're not satisfied with the results after burning your candle for 3 to 4 hours, you don't have to actually make an entirely new candle. What you can do is basically scoop out the middle of your candle just where the wick is with any quarter tool. Remove the wick and then place another wick of a different size in the center. You don't have to use any double-sided sticker to stick the wick, just keep it as it is, and then use a heat gun to melt the top and fill up the gap, and after that, wait for the candle to cool and go back to town with your candle. Number 2, how much wax to put in a jar. If you want to know how much wax goes inside a jar, as we illustrated in chapter 6 where we made the candle, you can fill up your jar with water and then multiply that amount by 0.8 and you will know how much wax you will need to fill up to get the right amount in the jar. So let's assume you want to know how much wax goes inside an 8-ounce jar. Then what you can do, fill it up with water, you will get around 250, and then you will multiply this number by 0.8, and then you will get a final number of 200 grams. This is what you will want to use to fill up your jar using wax. Number 3, fragrance load. More fragrance oil doesn't mean that you'll get a stronger centro. This is a myth and a misconception between candle makers. You see, as we mentioned, some waxes can have a specific capacity of fragrance that they can hold. So it is always best to check with your waxes supplier to check the capacity of the wax. What you can do, let's say your wax has a range between 6 and 8%. Start with 6% and test. Then work your way up 1% at a time until you're satisfied and there are no problems with your candle. Number 4, when to use a heat gun. A heat gun can be used for multiple purposes. You can use it to heat up your jars before pouring. You can use it to flatten out the surface if it's a bit rough. You can use it to clear out the frosting. You can use it to potentially fix wet spots. You can even use it to clean wax that is stuck on your workstation surface. Number 5, avoid putting candles on marble or cold surfaces when they are cooling. Cold surfaces tend to cause problems when the wax is cooling, and this could cause some inconsistencies on how the wax actually starts hardening on different places. So it's better to keep your candle on a surface that has a stable temperature. Something like wood would be optimal. Alright, well, this wraps up the entire course. I'm so proud that you made it up to this point. And always, please, if you have any questions, you can always reach out. And once you're done with making your candle, don't forget to share it so we can check your results. You can also always revisit the videos to check on some information that you may have missed. Anyway, thank you so much for joining the course and thank you so much for listening to me. I wish you the best of luck. Goodbye.